Hello everyone, it's uxwbill here once again with a kitchen table electronics repair video. This time around it's featuring a Holmes Air brand ultrasonic humidifier. This was, as you can imagine, a find from the Goodwill. And it looks like it's in good shape. I would say it's not had a whole heck of a lot of use. I don't honestly know how old it is for certain. The FCC ID points to 1985. But I don't think that the Holmes Air brand was around back then, though I really wasn't old enough to tell one way or the other. All I know for sure is that most of the Holmes Air branded products I have seen date from the early 1990s to the present day. Anyway, this thing looks good, and it doesn't seem to have had a whole lot of use, but when I powered it up, I found that something was wrong. Now, as you can see, I've gone ahead and put some water in the unit to go ahead and demonstrate the problem. Now I'll go ahead and turn it on. And it doesn't really produce any sound to speak of, so go ahead and turn up the humidity control. And you can kind of hear the soft buzzing of the ultrasonic element if you listen very carefully. I don't know if the camera will pick that up or not. But the ultrasonic element is doing what it ought to do. If I open this up, you can see that there is definitely humid mist being produced. There's just no air moving. And if I go ahead and I blow into the front air grill on the unit, you can see that mist does indeed come out of there. So clearly, the little fan inside this thing is no longer running. Now, that's why it's somewhat debatable as to whether or not this can really be considered an electronic repair, as the electronics inside this device that produce the ultrasonic effect that atomizes the water, those are working perfectly. It's just the little fan that's not. Nevertheless, it is an electric repair, and as soon as I've gone ahead and drained all the water out of there, I'll go ahead and pop this thing open and see if I can figure out what's wrong with it. I suspect that the cheap little fan motor has got seized up bearings. Hopefully it wasn't operated in this condition for so long that the little motor is ruined or has burned itself out, which is unfortunately all too common of a circumstance with these, as many of them use a simple shaded pole AC motor. I have seen a very few that use a DC brushless blower, but that is definitely the exception rather than the rule. Alright, here's the bottom cover taken off, and as you can see, it really doesn't look like this unit's had a whole heck of a lot of use. There's just not a lot of dust inside of it. There's not a lot of water scale and lime buildup, although this screw here has rusted pretty badly. Hopefully I won't have to take that out. And this one over here is not in much better shape. Now, I popped the cover off of this to look at the driving transistor and the piezoelectric transducer, just to see if maybe I could find a date code on those things. And I really didn't find anything too interesting there, as the transducer doesn't say anything and the transistor simply has a leading 7 and then a number of the week. I've forgotten offhand what the week is. Here on the bottom, though, I don't know if this constitutes a date code or not. You can see 07/13/87. I don't know if that's month, day, year, or what that might be. I really thought this thing was a good deal newer than that, but maybe it does date from the 1980s. Whatever it may be, it certainly doesn't show signs that it's had a lot of use, and there you can see the little shaded pole motor that drives the fan. And if I go down in here with this screwdriver and I try to turn those fan blades, I'll bet that I find, yep, they're just stuck. That little motor has simply run out of lubrication and it's seized up. Now, I don't know if it's been harmed by that or not. I'll actually have to get it out of here and take a look at it to know for sure. Luckily, that doesn't seem to be too difficult. Looks like it should just be a matter of 2 screws, and then the thing should lift up and out of there, but we'll see. Take a look at that. Now, this humidifier was assembled in Taiwan, so that's more than a little surprising to see a Mexican-made part in there. You'd think that the company that made this would have simply sourced all of those parts from vendors local to their part of the world, but I guess not. Now I've got this fan motor loose, and indeed it does just kind of back out of here with a little bit of encouragement and care to make sure that I'm not going to mangle any of the wires. Going to pause for safety here. A lot of the electronics in this thing are powered from a transformer that steps the AC line voltage down to a much lower voltage. However, again, this uses a high voltage, high frequency output to drive that piezoelectric transducer, and that can really get you hurt. Likewise, this little fan motor is directly powered from the AC power line, and its frame could be energized while this unit is turned on. So if you have any plans of working on a device similar to this, don't touch anything inside when it's powered on or even plugged into the wall. And before you do work on it, be very, very sure that you have unplugged it. I couldn't find the little zoom spout oiler, so what I've got instead is the good old standby, the old Craftsman pump style oiler. And what I'll use it to do, I will carefully apply a little bit of oil to that bearing in there. Now, unfortunately, this motor is so little and so cheap that it doesn't have any proper oiling holes in it. So I'll just have to hope that I can get close enough and hopefully not drizzle a whole bunch of oil all over the little motor and get that oil to go into the bearing. Now, you have to be careful when you do this, because if you oil the little motor too much, the oil will get into the electrical parts of the motor and it may start smoking, or it may even start on fire. And now comes the fun part. Now I've got the front bearing oiled to try and get it to loosen up and work in there, which it hasn't done quite yet. I've gone ahead and lubricated the little motor, and now it's time for the actual test. In order to be prepared for this test and be able to do it without risking the health of this piezoelectric transducer, I have to take a special precaution here. Now, I could do this one of two ways. You see, this thing has a float switch in it that determines whether or not it has run dry or if the water has dropped below some safe minimum level. This switch is wired such that it kills power to the transducer's drive circuitry. Without that water there to cool it, the transducer would cook. And so in order to test this little motor safely, since this switch is also operable by gravity and is right now in the safe to run position, I either need to disconnect power from the transducer board, or in this case I can simply turn the humidistat all the way down and the transducer will not operate. But if you do the same, again, you have to be very careful of that, as I would imagine it doesn't take very long to cook that little transducer. But let's turn this on and see if oiling the motor has made any difference whatsoever. Hopefully the little motor is not dead. Well, it's trying to come back to life. It's not really running at the speed it ought to. As it works that oil into the bearings, it should speed up and start going faster and faster. It may also need more oil than that. I've sat here and played the shaft of the motor back and forth while carefully drizzling oil into the front bearing. I've also gone ahead and oiled the back bearing, and we'll just see if it can actually come out of it or not. It's moving a little air, but I don't think it's moving enough, and I expect that if I let it sit here and run, this little motor would start to overheat. So I will give it a little more treatment and try it again. Well, I've had the little motor running for about 10 minutes now, and it hasn't shown any signs of overheating. In fact, it only gets mildly warm to the touch. So I guess that really is all the faster it turns and all the more air that it moves. Again, though, this brings out the interesting argument of quality versus cost. After all of us who are into these old antique box fans and similar fans have all noticed how these box fan motors, many of which said lubricate every 6 months to a year, oftentimes ran for 40 or more years before they simply locked up, whereas assuming this thing was built in 1987, it only lasted for a little over 20, and that seems to be under pretty gentle use as well, because the inside of this unit is simply not very filthy. Well, it's time to go ahead and put this thing back together. I've wiped up what little excess oil there was. I did have some that drizzled out and down onto the motor, but I cleaned it up. It should be okay. And I'll put this thing back together and see if it works properly. If it does, I'll have to come up with some kind of a proper deflector little chimney thing for it. One thing's for sure, this unit is definitely quieter than my other ultrasonic humidifier when it's in operation. In my previous ultrasonic humidifier video, someone posed the question of just how ultrasonic is ultrasonic. In other words, although this unit operates outside of the human hearing range, would it still operate outside of the range of hearing that our pets, such as our dogs and cats, and even wild animals might have? I would have to say that the answer is probably yes. I looked up the FCC ID on this unit, which you can see printed right there. The last 8 digits, the last 8 letters of the FCC ID are actually the manufacturer of this machine. Clever way to sneak that through. And the FCC certification for this thing reports that it operates at a frequency of 1.7 megahertz, which should place it pretty much outside of the hearing of anything that I can think of. Maybe there's something that can hear out that far, I don't know. You'll also notice there's a warning there not to pour water into the air outlet nozzle, and for good reason too. Let's see if the little fan is still working like it ought to. Turn on the power, and there is air coming out of there. Maybe I can direct a little of it into the camcorder's microphone, I don't know. I'm going to go ahead and pour some water into this. There you can see that float switch and how it would be operated by gravity when the unit is upside down. I'll put this little chimney in place just to avoid making a mess. Turn up the intensity of the mist a little bit. Turn up the humidistat. And look at that, it is working nicely once again. It's not even doing too badly without the air directing baffle in place. Maybe it could be used that way. I'd have to think that it came with one when it was new, but it's hard to tell. Well, there you have it, folks. For the first time in a long time, a kitchen table electronics repair video. Thank you for watching, and feel free to leave a comment if you have one. Now there's one use for junk mail. Take that, Capital One.